Every bit of that conversation regarding how we're teaching more in the simulated environment and earlier hands-on practice also speaks to a very small but huge in some part component of retention and ability to adapt to the real world once you get out of the educational scene, and that's stress inoculation therapy.
Yes.
Every part of that increases people's stress. Well, I've only done this for a week, and now they want me to practice it. I've only had one semester on this, but they want me to do sims while I learn it. Yeah, that stress inoculation is proven beneficial in just about every area of professional education, let alone medical education. It's worth it whether you like it or not.
And we bring it up to 80% retention of information.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask what the difference. That's huge.
Yeah, so a 60% increase in the retention of information. Yeah. So stress inoculation, the ability to feel like you're more comfortable in the environment when you go out, you're much more prepared. And so so bring it back to the educational theories, right? We've got multiple educational theories that are at play, and the debrief is what's important. The debrief is actually what ties it all together, because now we've got this metacognitive learning experience where the students are able to reflect on their learning and practice. And so the simulation itself, because scenarios have always been in practice, but what we would do is we would run the scenario. Simulation has been a foundational component of EMS education since the beginning of EMS education, but we weren't necessarily doing it correctly. I don't want to say we were doing it wrong, because we've always run sim, and obviously everyone in this room has been effective in their careers. But there is a more effective way to have done it and to do it moving forward. And so we just need to pull in what we know if we are doing actual simulation as opposed to a scenario. And so when we did our education, we didn't debrief, we did a hot wash, which was here's what you did right, here's what you did wrong, we're on to our next scenario. We didn't allow for the time for the students to actually reflect on their learning. And so when we do a debrief, like with your debriefs, we do a theoretically based debrief. And so you're going to choose which theoretically based debrief you're going to use based off of the objectives of your simulation.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, there's two things that paramedics absolutely hate, and that's the way things are and any change.
Absolutely.
So, to make database changes that's so key to, not go with the status quo and not question the way things are. I mean, I'm sure that took a huge amount of work to make people make this shift.
Yeah, and that's, we have to, moving forward in all EMS education, it has to be based off of what are the data-driven changes in medicine and data-driven changes in education, because both of those things are coupled together.
Yep. And therein lies part of the problem. On the medical knowledge side, it's standard and well known in America that once something has been adopted as cutting edge, and then adopted as common knowledge, and then adopted as common practice, and then implemented as standard teaching, from its first well-founded article to a plethora of information proving its effectiveness, takes about 10 years for us to say, all right, we'll go ahead and do that.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Therein lies the problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're already behind.
All the time.
I want to ask kind of a different question, but you obviously hear a lot of the paramedic feedback when they're on rotations and stuff. Is there any feedback they would have for the providers they encounter in the ER? Because you got three of us here.
Right.
What stuff do they say about us that is good? What stuff's bad? How can we give them better feedback?
So I actually send my paramedic students to so I initially send them to round with nurses, because that when they're in their initial clinical rotations, that's the information that they need. That's what they need to be doing. But beyond their first few rotations, they need to be going with the mid-levels and the physicians, because that's the point in their education where they are, right? Because the focus of when I explain to the general population, the general public, people don't understand the levels of care of EMS, like we were talking about earlier. People don't understand the level of education for EMT, an AEMT, or a paramedic. So I relate it to nursing because people understand nursing. People understand the difference as generalities between a CNA, an LPN, and an RN. So I say, an EMT is CNA, an AEMT is an LPN, and a paramedic is an RN. But obviously the scope of practice is very different between a paramedic and an RN. And the assessment that a paramedic does is very different than a nursing assessment. And so as the paramedics progress through their clinical rotations in the hospital, they are not performing a nursing assessment. Their assessments are much more in line with the assessments that our mid-level providers or advanced practice providers and our physicians are performing. And so that's really what I want them to be doing. And they actually are much more comfortable. They feel, that they feel that alignment once they're able to kind of marry up with those level of providers.
Does anybody have any particular stories they want to share this episode?
Oh, let's see. Well, I will start by saying that I started in my early career. People always think, obviously, like I've been around for a couple minutes, and so people, especially my students, especially my students that are not coming from the field. So I started in the emergency room. I was an ER tech, ER secretary, and went to paramedic school. And actually, when I went to paramedic school, I had never been on an ambulance. So the great experiences there, amazing physicians, amazing nurses, and we had a couple, we had a guy get shot in his femoral artery in our lobby. And one of our physicians had to ride over from our ER to Maine because obviously he was going to die. He didn't, only because he got shot right in the lobby. But the students often feel that maybe they are less than because they're not coming from the field to go into the field of paramedicine. And I will tell you that I find no validity to that. I think that my experience working in the ER prior to going into the field as a paramedic was incredibly valuable. First, I knew all the physicians, so that was helpful. But second, I was able to anticipate what was going to be needed, what they were going to ask for. I knew what was going to come down the line, and that was really helpful. And so the other thing is, in my experience, that there is this conception in the field that there's this certain number of years that you have to have practiced as an EMT before you can go to paramedic school. And can I cuss?
Yeah.
Okay. That's total bullshit.
So this is the whole zero to hero argument, right?
That's correct. So here's where I think that is, again, I have over 16 years as a paramedic educator. And so, first, how do you quantify that? So I have people, right, that are coming into my program from all different agencies. So how do I quantify their years of experience? That I can't. So that's number one. So years in cert doesn't mean anything to me. Number two, there's actually value of people coming into the program that just got their EMT cert but have medical experience in other avenues. So, but number three, even if they just got their EMT cert and they have no other experience, what I have found is what makes a difference is the individual's drive and dedication. So that is what I think is the most valuable. And then as far as like stories, my experience as a new paramedic in the field, what I did experience was I didn't know. I learned things, obviously out of the book. I was very competitive in paramedic school. I know it's very surprising to those of you that know me. And was always the top of my class. But when I got into the field, there were things that I didn't know that people that had come from the field would have known. Mm-hmm. And so I did have to work very hard as being a brand new paramedic in the field out of my FI. And so, or field intern or field experience, right, with my training with my field training officer once I got cleared. And so one of the experiences that sticks out was I had a patient that was a hypoglycemic patient, and that time obviously we started an IV, because again this was a couple minutes ago, started an IV and administered D50. So obviously the patient wakes up, blood sugar's fine, but we have to transport to the hospital, and then my patient starts to decline again. And so, because obviously, is burning off his sugar real fast, check again, starts to become hypoglycemic again, and I'm like, well, shit, can I give another AMPA D50? So I have to ask my EMT that's driving me to the hospital if I can give another AMPA D50, right? Whereas I feel like a paramedic that had come from the field would have already known that was something that was okay.
Sure.
So, yes, so that was
so true. Also gives a lot of credence to having an EMT partner with some experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
there's nothing like having
absolutely that
what's
protection.
What's that old saying? This paramedic. This is
the
not
EMT
true.
save
paramedics save lives, and
yes.
EMTs save paramedics.
Yeah.
Yes,
it's so true.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
Kate saved me the other day on a possible stroke alert because, we're in and out of those intake bays maybe a little too quickly sometimes. And Kate's like, hey, did you check if there was arm weakness on this patient? I was like, no, I don't think they need
Nice
it.
catch.
They don't need to be a stroke alert. And I was like, oh, maybe I should go back in and do a little bit better assessment. Sure enough, they needed to be a stroke. A young person, unlikely
That's
to be
your
having a
first clue,
stroke.
Aaron.
But
Anytime anyone says something along the lines of, are you sure? You go, no,
That's
I'm not.
my least favorite thing to do in the whole world. But if I ask a question, or the story somehow changes from the moment they walk into the intake bay to when you guys get here. I had someone yesterday that was like, my lower back hurts, and then all of a sudden he's like, no, it's my stomach right here, and I was like, what? And so and this woman was an awful historian, and and so he's like, okay, and walks away, and I was like, I did a BFAST and her arm was, and so it really kind of made me a little stressed out. But I hate, you guys know what you're looking at, so I hate coming in and going,
No, we love it.
Hey,
We
by
love
the
when you tell us
way.
what it is.
All the
Don't ever
info
think we
magic.
know.
Okay.
It's very helpful.
And you
Oh my
should,
gosh,
right? That's
oh.
advocating for your patient.
Yeah,
And some of us have resting bitch face, but that we try to be approachable. I'm not looking at. I think I
Why'd you
probably
look
have.
at me,
I know.
Aaron?
I think I have it too. But but we try to be approachable because we do miss things
Yeah.
like that. And
Yeah.
this patient was probably unlikely to be having a stroke, right? But the answer is not. Are they really having a stroke? It's do they need to be a stroke alert?
Yeah,
The
so
answer was
if they
absolutely.
go,
they
yeah,
need
go
be
to
a
the
stroke
back
alert,
and people
right.
are like, "What the heck?" We're like, "Oh, yeah, that's a good thing." I think it might have been you. We had someone that came in, and she came in with a blaring headache, and then order a migraine cocktail, and then I walk back. I'm like, did she tell you she was pregnant? And I think it was you. She's like, no, she did not. And I was like, of course, why would they? Why would you toss that information out?
Sometimes they really
Details.
assume that we know more
Oh my gosh.
than we do.
Yeah, and so it's I don't know. I have to practice my way of doing it. I don't want to tell you, or I don't know. I guess assuming, but also it's just tiptoeing around people. And some people are you all are receptive to it, but there are people out there what do you mean? And I'm like, I know you know what you know. What are the chances the person did not mention they were, 18 weeks pregnant, and so stuff like that. So I get a little sweaty, but maybe more time will get that to fade.
The providers that think they're infallible get humbled probably pretty often. It doesn't take a whole lot of experiences, I feel like, before you're like, maybe I should listen when people bring up an issue.
Right.
Nurse, tech,
Yes.
it doesn't matter who. That's I always tell the new APPs that, like, if a nurse is worried about a patient, stop what you're doing, get off your ass at the computer, and go look at the patient, because they're in that room way more than you
Yes,
are.
they are.
Yeah.
And so if they're, you need to pay attention to that stuff.
I
You're
had
gonna miss
this
something.
kid. He was 17, and I get like in school we're taught a significant MOI, and then at where we work is like the very strict full trauma, limited trauma, and so on. And this kid, and I say he was a kid, was treading between limited trauma, and so I called back and I was like, I want to make this person a limited trauma, and they said, well, what happened? It was an MVC, and it wasn't a rollover, and he was restrained, but there was a fish tank in the back of his car that got him, and he looked awful. I mean, like passing out, awful. And so it's like, I want to make him like, nope, he doesn't count. I'm like, if you would just look at his
one of my pet
face,
peeves.
Yeah.
please. I think actually Tracy was the one like, I want this kid to be a limited,
Right.
and I was like, okay, thank you. Can you please call the person back there and let them know? Because
I think the limited criteria is like there's all this criteria and then provider discretion.
it is at
That's,
the
and
You
it's
can
also
always use
bolded.
that one.
It's
Yeah,
not just
right.
it's bolded.
It's
Right.
at the very
That's good.
bottom, but
That's
it's I maybe this is me still being new. For me, I'm like those minutes of the back and forth debating. I'm like, man, we could have already had him back there by now, and it's just such a weird gray area. But
But I think that speaks to your gut.
Yes.
That gestalt, your gut feeling. Don't ever ignore that.
Absolutely.
I would always rather err on the side of caution.
Uh-huh.
And okay, so you feel stupid, but really,
Yeah.
I'd rather be safe than sorry.
100%.
yeah.
And you
it's
guys
easier
get-
to backtrack than to upgrade once you're behind.
Yes.
by a long shot.
And you guys
Yes.
get really good gestalt working in intake. You see 80 patients that are coming in. You see the ones that are sick and need to be bypassed. I mean, you recognize them right away.
You can-
Most of the patients
yeah.
are not that way, but you see so much volume. You're assessing so many patients that you see that one that needs to go back, and you can recognize it right away.
Usually I like to think so. Some people just kind of, it's, I've had this one woman that looked great. She goes, I'm a little uncomfortable, and she's an SVT in the 230s, and she's like, I'm just a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I would have never known until I got her on the monitor. And then, but that one kid, I was like, just based alone on the way that he looked, I was like, I would love for him to just scoot John back there. So it's, but it's just the stepping on the toes of, hey, what I know, and
It really shouldn't be stepping on the toes
That's
of anybody
exactly
either.
right.
I mean, that's a good comparison, like working in intake at the front of an ER where you're just hearing the initial story and then passing them back. That's the same as saying the paramedic and EMT in the field, what they saw, and whether or not you're going to listen to them when they roll into your emergency department, which you always should. I have tailored conversations on occasion, said, hey, you're going to have to wrap this up. Anything else important? We got to get moving. Or, hey, some of that's irrelevant to me. Let me ask you a few direct questions. But you really want to hear what they said, what they have to say, and what they saw prior to them coming to you, no matter where they came from, whether it's walking in the ER, whether they're out in the field with the medics. Because, number one, the medics, the EMTs and the paramedics that come up in the field and see these patients, just like intake in a hospital, the volume of things they see that may never make it to your ER, it broadens their scope of how they react in the field, builds their gestalt. That's important. They have something more to offer every day. They are seeing more patients than they bring to you, and then you realize. So they have a good gestalt, number one. Number two, patients, like you said, man, their story can change 3 times between 2 interviews or 5 interviews in 15 minutes. The things that people don't tell you are amazing that you need to know. The things that they do tell you that they won't stop telling you that you don't need to know are amazing. There's so much of this practice in the ER is, in all emergency medicine is what I mean, is steering the patient. But the point of the story is everybody who stepped into their lives for a moment, heard something that they said, saw something in their environment or in that person or on their face in their exam that may change 5 minutes later, whether it's the story or the vital signs or the patient themselves or the environment, whether they were more stressed in the field and now they feel better and it's clearer, or the other way around. They're becoming more panicked because they're not okay as time goes by. You can't see in the emergency room, as a physician especially, the change. You get this moment in time going forward. And a lot of where you end up may be based on what they were like before they got to you. So it is important to listen up and pay attention and try and complete your picture that you can't go back in time and get yourself by listening to your paramedics, which is why it's important for paramedics to realize and hold on to the fact, no matter how any given person you hand off to, any physician who has a bad day and is short with something, you need to hold on to the fact that your view, your experience, your exposure to that person and the next person and the next person and the next person is important, and you need to continue to share it with the next people in line to take care of them. That is a must. The day that paramedics feel like, well, that doctor's on, I'm not talking to him, that's a problem for the patient, which is more important than personalities and discrepancies and feeling like you stepped on toes.
Yeah.
You shouldn't feel that way. You should just ignore that, period. As best you can. As best you can. I know that's not easy, but it's true.
No, there's been times where I'm like, I'll die on this hill. This is something that I think you should know.
Right.
And then there's other times where, again, I just feel like and also working in a hospital is very new to me. So I'm like, maybe this is something that would stress me out when I don't have the resources in the field, but here they're in the best pace possible. So I try to like ebb and flow with they're in the best place. I don't need to panic as much versus if I was out in the middle of nowhere on a goat farm, I would be stressed out right now. So trying
Not
to
knowing where anything is in your bag.
I'm like, okay, I have everything in my room, and there's people here that can fix this for me.
Right.
So
Really can fix it.
it's knowing when to. I keep saying, I'm like, this might be me being dramatic, but
It's okay. I can't tell you how many times I joke standing up from my desk to go, I'm going to go into that room real quick and cancel the stroke alert. I will walk in there and start from scratch and take into account what you or anybody up front said, and then make a decision. Being playful is very different than being dismissive.
Oh,
You have
yes.
to be careful how that comes across too.
Yeah.
But anything's easier to back step
Yes.
than it is to hurry up and play catch up when the patient actually had X, Y, or Z, like a freaking stroke.
Yeah.
You have a time limit there, right? So
that's
it's
what.
important
Yeah,
to
like
keep in mind.
overshooting. I had
Yeah.
this poor family a few weeks ago that came in, and I get so frustrated when I'm trying to find the window for a stroke because, I'm like, all right, well, when was last time normal? Well, she woke up this morning and this woman was like posturing. And so I was like, when was the last time you saw her walking, talking, eating? And I was like, I'm not trying to be rude, but blunt. I need you to tell me exactly. And so I had to apologize to the family, and I'm so sorry for doing that, but I don't give an F what she ate this morning for breakfast. I need to know the last time you saw her sitting upright saying, hey, good morning. And I have to haul booty to that and get, and not, maybe abrasive's not the right word, but just
Sometimes.
very to the point of, please just tell me.
I get called East Coast. That's what I get.
East Coast.
You are East Coast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So be it.
I mean, I am.
I'm pretty sure Connecticut is still on the East Coast.
It is.
I think it's been a while.
Yeah, you earned it.
That's the rookie EMT and paramedic mistake is last known normal. Like, oh, they woke up at 6 a.m. Nope, what time do they go to bed?
Yeah.
That's got to be last known normal.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So I think I've had that issue sometimes before. Like, sometime this morning. Like, no. When they weren't feeling right this morning. Okay, so yesterday.
Because the debate's always like with these wake up strokes. Does the data support giving them TPA if it's a wake up stroke? And now and they're still in that 4-hour window since they woke up, but really the last known normal is like, well, whenever they went to bed feeling okay.
And they don't, and the families have no idea. They're like, why does it matter to the exact dot? I'm like, I will tell you later, but early this morning. My early morning is 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so I have no idea. All right, when I got home from work, I don't know you. I don't know when that was. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
You have the timelines. You're like, how long has this been going on? Well, since I was seen last time. When was that?
Oh yeah, or people come back
5 minutes to get.
Or the next generation,
Yeah.
everything's in minutes.
Yeah.
It's been a hot minute. I'm like, okay, I'm going to need you to narrow that down. I mean a hot minute. I'm like, all right, that was absolutely not.
I did that to someone. I was like, oh yeah, it's been a hot minute, and they're like, a minute, and I was like, a very long time, like a minute 60 seconds. I'm like, I understand.
I can't tell you how many times I've said, is that a minute, an hour, a day, a week, or a year? I'm trying to give them options. And you may have to do that 3 times. But people just don't understand the relevance and the importance of certain details,
Right.
time being one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's when you got to just, okay, I'm going to have to steer you right, whether you like it or not. This I need to know now.
It's better to ask for forgiveness than
It is,
permission
it
in
is.
some
It's-
things,
yeah.
and so I'm like, I'll
Technically an
apologize for my
emergency
attitude
medicine field,
later.
right?
Yeah, just to get you where I
Yeah.
needed to get you exactly as soon as I can.
Right.
So, and
It's hard in triage because that's the name of the game is getting it quickly. And, hopefully when you get them to the room, you have more time to actually explain why these questions are relevant and, give the patient the time to feel understood and that we care why they're here. We care what their concern is as well as their chief complaint and all that stuff. But unfortunately, triage is not where there's time for that. Do you get any specific complaints from paramedic students at all about provider interactions?
Sometimes. So sometimes it's. Sometimes I think it might be the personality of the paramedic student, but I think that particularly, although I can't necessarily blame it, I think that everyone is really generally short-staffed. I think, and this, I mean, post-COVID, of course, but I think we saw a change in provider demographic pre-COVID and post-COVID. I think our provider demographic pre-COVID was we had more retention in the ED pre-COVID. And so post-COVID, we have newer graduates in the ED that our students are interacting with. And so with that being the case, there's not a lot of necessarily understanding of scope. And so I send my students with their objectives. Now, by accreditation standards, we have a preceptor manual, clinical preceptor manual that our liaison, our hospital liaison has, and is somewhere in each of the EDs. Obviously, no one looks at it. But it is there. The objectives are in there. And then each one of the paramedic students has a list of every single objective that I have given to them. In fact, I write objectives even for every single level. And so the list is long. And so in the event that, because sometimes there's a resistance to the paramedic students being present. There's sometimes resistance to our EMT students being present, but they generally are more accepted because they're not as involved in patient care. It's much more observation. We do see, I think probably what I hear the most is that our paramedic students are not allowed in the trauma base. They get kicked out of trauma base a lot.
I have not seen that.
Yeah.
I honestly, even
That drives me
in my
crazy.
level, I abandon even my EMT students all the time. I just haul booty, and it's hard to be like, hey, find a corner. Matt V is supposed to be here, is really good at being like, get in there and observe. And I'm like, I don't know where to put you. And and then some of them are really ambitious and go, I'm like, this is not at the time, maybe. And then sometimes maybe it is, but I think central too, it's very hard to get into a trauma bay, and then people don't recognize if you're a student right away.
Yeah.
So they want to ask you to do something, and then you're like, I can't. And then people are like, what do you mean you can't? And
Right.
so it's without it written across your forehead. People are like, why are you here?
Yeah.
And so it's
A system like ours is very difficult when it's a full trauma, just because
Yes.
there's so many resources in the room. Even as APPs, we don't need to be in the room a
Yeah,
lot
I
of the
stand
times.
in back and put orders in. That's what I do.
it's-
That's what my best role is. But I also think
Yeah.
that speaks volumes to, unfortunately, people that are not in emergency medicine, pre-hospital care. They just don't understand what happens out there, and they think that they're just ambulance drivers. That's what they think all the time. And there's, I think there's some great validity to requiring people to do third rides.
I agree.
Just.
Actually, one of the other systems is starting to require that for their ER staff, ED staff. And
I think it's really important, being on both sides of that.
understanding.
I wish I had more time for paramedic students, because I know personally when I see them, I always say, who are you? What are you doing? If I have an interesting patient, go here, go there, do this, tell me what you find. But then they're always, they really do try to stay out of our way, I think. And they know that we're busy, and they respect that, and they don't want to bother us. I never
wanna
am
burden.
bothered if I'm not in the middle of
Yeah.
things.
it's hard just to remember you have someone around you, so you just are caught up in it, and you're like, hey, this is or even just like IV students I have, I'm like, do you want to know what a valve feels like? This is what that's what's going on there. But I will forget that someone's shadowing me,
Right.
especially if you get caught up in the hustle. And so it's very hard to play that balancing act of, we need to keep the flow going, but you need to be as hands-on as possible, like get the most out of this experience. And I think the trauma base, which sucks because it's a great place for them to see. And I had a student the other day who did follow me in for anaphylaxis. And he
It's a perfect
stood,
person for them to see.
yeah, stood in there and watched, and we leave. I'm like, any questions? He's like, that was a lot. I was like, I know, and it's just because we want to kind of get ahead of everything. But if you saw something that didn't make sense, you know, please. I like to do that afterwards. And I'm like, ask me any questions. That was a lot in one moment, but in the moment, it's really hard for me to be like, hey, this is what's happening. Matt V is phenomenal at doing that. He's great at doing that.
It's hard for us on the provider side too, because a lot of our patient care is not spent with the patient too, and the paramedics need to be assessing the patient, talking to the patient, practicing those skills. So sometimes it's good just to send them in a room and be like, hey, we've already assessed this patient, but I need you to go do it again.
Absolutely.
Tell me what exam you think they need. Come back, give me a list of differentials. That's what I try to do.
Yes, that's
Same here.
absolutely what they need to do.
Because we spend so much time putting in orders and then reviewing all the results and then talking with a specialist, and they don't really need to know that component.
Right. And
It's
they don't
helpful
need
for
to
them to
do
be exactly. And so, you know, I think sending them in the room sometimes.
Although I would have them looking at labs.
Yeah.
They need to look at labs.
Okay.
They don't necessarily obviously need to look at x-rays and things, although I would love them to do that, but they do need to look at labs. And I don't know if you remember that you guys did a lab values assignment very begrudgingly. Everybody does it very begrudgingly.
Oh, I'm
but-
sure I threw a fit.
Oh yeah, I mean, everybody does.
In between me dancing on tables, I'm sure I was like, I can't believe we have to do this.
Shaking in front of the ambulance kind of thing. But yes, the lab values assignment, paramedics absolutely need to be looking at and interpreting and associating lab values to the current patient presentation.